T-Bones here, coming at you with your history lesson here. Alright, so starting off, things are starting to heat up. People are a little upset at each other for various reasons, but the main one being slavery. Okay, is it good or bad? Spoiler alert, it's bad. Yet, still, some people decided to debate about it. We have a few things that are going to happen here. Is we're going to have a compromise, okay? The Compromise of 1850, which was a way of trying to keep people together, okay? At this point, people are already talking about secession, okay? It's not that Abraham Lincoln gets elected president and people are like, oh, fine, let's secede. People have been talking about it for quite a while, okay? And part of that was because of this division, slave state, free state, slave state, free state. The few things I want to just clarify here, just because you lived in the North and you wanted it to be a free state does not, unfortunately, mean you weren't racist, okay? A lot of these people thought that black people shouldn't be slaves, but they didn't necessarily also think that black people were equal to white people, okay? So we have a bunch of folks who aren't quite on where we are today, or where I think we should be today. But you still had a number of people in the North that, regardless, thought that black folks should not be slaves. Okay, so, got to give them credit where credit is due. You also had folks in the South who thought that black folks shouldn't be slaves. Okay, the anti-slavery Democrats. Now, first off, I've said this before and I'll say it again, do not confuse Republicans and Democrats from history with their analogs today. Okay, the Democrats here are mostly in the South. In fact, the South is all Democrats, really. When we say Democrats in the South here, this is the conservative party. Okay, but again, it's really not a one-to-one. Okay, everything is so different now versus then. The issues are different. You really can't make a comparison. Okay, you can't say, oh, Democrats were pro-slavery back then. You can't say, oh, well, the Democrats were really the Republicans back then. You can't really, these were the conservatives. You can't really, don't try to blame folks for today for something that happened 150 years ago. It's just not sensible. So, when we're talking about this, just keep that an open mind there. Also realize that, you had Democrats, these conservative folks here, who also thought slavery was bad, all right? Not everyone was pro-slavery, okay? Ooh, excuse me. All right, so when California applies for statehood as a free state, there's a lot of difficulties, okay? Because California was going to be a big state, and there was a lot of worry that was going to tip the balance. Okay, because remember, the main thing to worry about is both the House and Senate. Every new state gets 2 new senators, okay? And every new state is also going to get a few members of the House of Representatives. And changing the balance in Congress is a huge deal. Much like what we worry about today is the balance of power in the Supreme Court, okay? To see who is a conservative justice versus a liberal justice, okay? And trying to make sure, a lot of folks are unhappy right now. They think it's too conservative. They want to have more liberal justices. Can we change the number of justices? Well, I mean, that has been done in the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean we want to do it today. And so we have that back and forth and that discussions and people who are upset and trying to find some sort of compromise. Back then, in our history book, right, there was this discussion of free state liberals and slavery conservatives trying to figure out how to keep it balanced. Okay. Fugitive Slave Act. This one was not my favorite part about this compromise. Basically, it is saying that when a slave from the South gets into the North, they are not free. They are forced to go back if they are caught. Okay. Now, while that's good on paper, a lot of people in the North refuse to do that. Okay, refuse to follow the law. Okay, not all laws are just and equal. Okay, so federal marshals are these law enforcement officers who are specifically trying to catch slaves. Okay, bitter anger in the North, slavery and racism. Stuff's bad, y'all. Okay, this is not good. Racism is the belief that one race is superior to others, or specifically, that is one definition. There's other definitions like we've talked about in class, where you have one group in power who has prejudice, racial prejudice against another group, and there's a power dynamic as well. Okay, but the way we generally use the term in popular culture, okay, prescriptivism versus descriptivism, we talked about that, is this racism, or it's just this prejudice based on race. Okay, let's see, that seems a little. Many slave owners justified that African Americans were better off under the care of plantation owners, okay? That they are happy slaves, that they're being taken care of. This is, of course, bupkis. This is fake news. This is bad. This is not true, okay? This man is not better off as a slave, okay? These kids are not getting an education as slaves, okay? And you had a lot of people who were pointing to the Bible at this time and using the Bible to justify slavery, which is ridiculous. Okay, so let's see. We have slavery being an important part of the economy and culture of the South. Okay, now that doesn't, in my mind, that doesn't justify keeping it, right? We have all sorts of things that are central to our economy and culture today that I don't think are valid or good or moral. Let's see. We had convinced wealthy plantation owners tried to convince the U.S. government to acquire Cuba from Spain as a slave state. Okay, they wanted to own Cuba and they wanted it to be full of slaves so that they can make more money. Okay, a little messed up. They even were tempted to try and figure out how to take it by force. Specifically, Cuba is where they grew a lot of sugar. Okay, so the idea was that we would then be able to grow the southern economy by growing sugar, which you cannot always grow in most of America. A lot of racists in the North. Okay, the North may have generally been a free state. That does not mean that they were not also racists. Okay. Country in crisis, Kansas-Nebraska Act. Okay, Bleeding Kansas. This was a lot of people were going into Kansas and fighting and beating the crap out of each other. Okay, if you think we're politically divided now, this was no joke. Okay, we are not killing each other on the streets yet. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Stephen A. Douglas lobbied for a railroad run through his state. Douglas is a great supporter of national expansion. Okay, and Douglas is going to show up a few more times. Okay, so remember that name. Let's see. Have the territory broken into smaller states. Okay, so here we had our free states. We have, and then as it's growing, okay, we have the territories turning into Nebraska territory and Kansas territory, Missouri. Okay, and we're starting to get some of the shapes that we know. Go over here. We got this guy glowering at us. I love this man, John Brown. He is a hero even today. John Brown was an intense young man. I guess not young, but he was a militant. Okay, a guy who believed in fighting. And an abolitionist. He wanted slavery done with. He did not think it was a good or just thing, and he would fight people to try to get rid of it. Okay, so it's tough. This is a hard thing where Is he a good man or is he a bad man, right? When you have somebody being enslaved, right, these slave owners, they're not good people. They're beating and doing awful things to black folks every single day. Should we beat them up violently and free the slaves? It's not an easy answer. I mean, to some people it is, yeah, right? We free these black folks violently so that they can be free. If someone is oppressing them violently, then you should answer that violence with more violence to get them out of there. Okay? The white slave owners are choosing violence against their slaves, so that's our recourse. That is one, argument for fighting against slavery in that way. Other folks believe that you could debate and do it diplomatically. We're going to see that ultimately slavery does not end with a debate. Slavery ends with folks like John Brown and the Civil War. Okay, unfortunately, slavery takes a war to end. Now, pulled 5 men out of their houses and brutally murdered them. Right. However, keep in mind the people he's brutally murdering are also slave owners who are not good to their slaves. Okay, these aren't just folks who just happen to own slaves. These are pretty awful folks. So it's tough. Bleeding Kansas, because there was fighting happening so much there. This is intense. Violence even reached Washington, D.C. Preston Brooks, a representative from South Carolina, had been angered by an anti-slavery speech given by Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner. When Brooks entered the Senate chamber, he severely beat Sumner with a cane. Okay? He gives Sumner a concussion, almost kills Sumner on the House floor with a cane. Okay? The caning of Sumner. Violence in the Capitol. Okay? Because Sumner had the audacity to say that maybe we shouldn't have slaves. This is one of the most important things to talk about. This Dred Scott decision is one of the most fundamentally important and misunderstood aspects. Okay, so I'm going to take some time about this. When we're talking about the South, okay, a lot of people today want to try and claim that the South's breaking away into the Confederacy was all about the states' rights. It was all about giving the states the right to choose. Now, that's bupkis. It does not hold up to scrutiny. Okay? The reason for that is twofold. One of which is the Dred Scott decision. And the other which is, if you're going to tell me that the South seceded into the Confederacy because they wanted to give the states the right to choose, then why did the Confederacy enshrine slavery into their Constitution? If it was all about giving states the right to choose, then why didn't the states in the Confederacy have the right to choose slavery? Why is it built into their Constitution where no one could remove it? Okay? As much as modern people might want to try and tell you that the Civil War was all about states' rights, it was about states' rights in that it was about the southern states' right to have slaves. That's what they thought. Okay? More than that, it's also ridiculous for the South to claim, or folks to claim, that the Civil War was about states' rights, because the Dred Scott decision proves that the Confederacy, the South, did not care about states' rights. This whole point, this whole argument that we see play out in the Supreme Court was this idea, okay? Let me show you right here. Taney further declared that since slaves were the personal property of slaveholders, Congress had never had the authority to restrict slavery in the territories. Okay? The whole point here is this renders the Missouri Compromise of 1820 unconstitutional. This strongly pro-slavery decision sparked outrage in the North and raised fears that Southerners might try to extend slavery to the whole country. This whole point was basically paving the way for the South to say, well, since we have our states say that we have slaves and that slavery is legal, and since our states say that we have slaves, that means that we can take our slaves to the North and they are still our slaves. Our southern state's law supersedes the northern state's law. Okay? So you can see the whole point of it was trying to make slavery legal for the whole country. Okay? So when you say that, or when someone says that the Confederacy was about states' rights, well, they didn't respect the northern states' rights of not having slavery. Okay? The whole argument of the Confederacy was that they should have slaves. Okay? And they try and justify it in any which fancy way they want to. And modern apologists are going to try and say that the Confederacy was all about states' rights. But that's because they don't know any better. They haven't actually studied the history. They're just saying what sounds good to them. Okay? I have zero tolerance for folks who do not know their history but want to try and talk to you about it on Facebook. When you look at this, it's very clear. Okay? The actual case, I mean, it lays it out pretty firmly here. Dred Scott was a slave. He was sent into a free territory with his master. He's like, hey, I'm in a free state now. My master brought me here. I'm not in a runaway, but I'm in a free state. I should be a free man. And so he takes his case and he brings it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, no, you're not even a person. Okay, you're not citizens of the United States. You may have been born here, but you are not actually citizens of the United States. And he specifically says members of the Negro African race. Okay, specifically saying all black people are not citizens. Okay, it's a really messed up decision. Okay, and this is because of this that Abraham Lincoln really starts to come into the national attention. His rebuttal to this, what he claims, he makes his House Divided speech and talks about how this essentially lays out a plan, a Southern plan to try to make slavery legal all around the country. And he claims that the South is colluding with the Supreme Court, which it probably was. It's a great speech. All right, more attacks, more fighting. Lincoln and Douglas. Okay, told you Douglas was coming back. House Divide itself cannot stand. I believe the government cannot endure permanently half slave, half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the House to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Now, this is just a small snippet. His actual whole speech is really, really good, in which he talks about he believes that there is a plan, a ploy in the South to make slavery all across the nation. And that's what he's worried about. Okay. Stephen Douglas, his main competitor for this part, is arguing for slavery. Stephen Douglas was not what I would call a good man. Here we see the election, and it looks like Lincoln wins by a landslide. Okay, lots of red over here. It looks like his biggest competitor was Breckinridge, but we do not talk about Breckinridge because Breckinridge actually was not anywhere near getting elected. He had 23.8% of the electorate and 18% of the popular vote, compared to 59% of the electoral vote and 39% of the popular vote. Over here, we see that Douglas, who only wins a single state, or two, 1.5 really, he gets 3.9 of the electoral, but 29.5 of the popular vote. Okay, the difference between popular and electoral vote, even today, is still kind of messed up. But you see, basically, this is really why Lincoln wins. I mean, it really wouldn't matter either way, technically. He had 59.4% of the vote. But when you look at this, okay, you see that the folks who are pro-slavery had 3 options. The folks who were anti-slavery had 1 option. Okay. If we're just talking about popular vote and if all 3 of these were just one person, okay, then Lincoln's 39.8% would not have been enough. And it's possible he might have lost. But still, generally, the folks in the North were so anti-slavery at this point that he might still have won. That's where all the electoral votes were. The Southern states secede. Okay. After Abraham Lincoln is elected, okay, they were suddenly faced with a Northern president who had not won a single Southern state. In fact, his name had not even appeared on the ballot in most of them. And this is the thing that they're afraid of, okay? It wasn't that Lincoln was suddenly going to take away slaves. He had very specifically said he wasn't. He had no intention of ending slavery. He would love to. He would like to end slavery, but he knew he did not just have that power, okay? And he knew he wasn't alienating the South wasn't going to win him anything. So the South still had more power in a lot of ways. The thing that happens, though, is the Northern president, Abraham Lincoln, wins, and the electoral map shows that he was always going to win with 59.4% of the vote. Okay? Even though all of the popular vote is kind of split between all of those folks who were pro-slavery. Lincoln doesn't even show up on the ballot for most of these. Okay? So, when you think about that, and you're a Southerner, and you're like, well, we'll never have a chance to win another presidency because anyone who's from the North will always win the presidency. Once they see that, okay, they feel like their chance for representation is becoming narrower. They're also very worried about his House Divided speech. Okay, he said that either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it, or advocates will push it forward. It will become lawful in all the states. What the Southern folks thought that this might mean that he was going to abolish slavery throughout the United States. Again, he does not actually have that power. Much like today, a lot of people don't understand the power of the presidency. The other thing to keep in mind here is Lincoln was really talking about how the South was trying to make slavery legal all the way across the states. But the people in the South misinterpreted his words to make it sound like he was trying to remove slavery from all across the world, the states. Okay? And again, he would like to. I'm not going to deny that. Abraham Lincoln, of course, would like to end slavery. But he does not think he has that power. He's not planning on it. He doesn't think he's going to be able to get to do that. Okay? On the day after the election, South Carolina's legislature gathered to convene and debate the possibility of seceding. Okay? Formally withdrawing from the Union, becoming independent. States had been threatening to do it numerous times. Okay, South Carolina had actually been really, really close to doing it in the 1830s. Okay, states' rights was sometimes talked about at this point. This is actually more of a modern take on it. Not as many folks of the time were talking about states' rights in this way. Some were, for sure, though. Argued that under the Constitution, states retain certain rights, including the right to secede. Okay, they definitely had that. They thought it was perfectly legal for them to secede from the Union. Okay. Once they start to vote for secession, a number of other folks also start to vote on it. Yeah, he wasn't even in office when they start to secede from the Union. Okay, so they don't actually secede from the Union during his presidency, which is interesting. let's see, Confederate States of America starts to actually, South Carolina leaves first, and the 10 other states join them. They become the Confederacy, temporary government in Montgomery, Alabama. Jefferson Davis is going to be the first president of the Confederacy, first and only. Okay. He specifically addresses that slavery is the reason they're doing this. Okay. So again, if we're talking about states' rights, the president of the Confederacy specifically says that they're doing it because of slavery. Okay. Many people opposed secession, calling it treason. They thought this would be bad. Others thought it would be best to wait before making a decision. Okay. For the time, Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Arkansas remained in the Union. Okay. They thought that this could be resolved peacefully. Efforts at compromise. So they start to talk about it. Okay. They have the Crittenden Plan. Federal government will have no power to abolish slavery in the states where it already existed. Okay, so they were going to try to enshrine slavery in the South, so it could not be taken away, and that would hopefully bring the Union back together. So again, they're still trying to figure out ways to not have a war about this, right? Proposal found many supporters in both the North and South. James Buchanan, okay, current president, he's the one who's the president right now. Lincoln has been elected. He's the president-elect, but he is not the president at this point. However, strongly objected to extending slavery in any new territories. Again, Abraham Lincoln does not want slavery to expand, okay? But he also doesn't think he has the power or really wants to end it completely, okay? Talks about his stuff. I mean, it's really good. Definitely read this. And then here, the day after his address, a message arrives from Washington that Fort Sumter, which lay at the entrance to the harbor in Charleston, South Carolina, was under threat. The Confederacy had surrounded a U.S. Army base, okay, and was threatening them, okay. So, what were we to do? When we talk about the war, when somebody says that the Civil War was the war of northern aggression, it's nonsense. The South shot first. The South attacked the Fort Sumter. The South did all of this. Okay. The North was looking for trying to find compromises. Okay. And we'll see what happens. All right, that's it. That's a long one. Sorry, it's a lot of stuff there. Have a good one, my dudes.